This oil tycoon woman disrespects Judge Caprio in court, instantly gets what she deserves. People in the courtroom that morning had no idea they were about to watch one of the most shocking displays of arrogance Judge Caprio had seen in months. It began with nothing more than a pair of red-bottom heels clicking against the marble floor. Heads turned before the doors even fully swung open because the posture, the confidence, and the attitude of the woman entering the room already felt out of place. She didn't arrive like a defendant summoned for a violation, she arrived like a CEO walking into her own boardroom. Veronica Lee Hale, daughter of the Hale oil dynasty, walked in with a designer blazer draped across her shoulders, a diamond necklace bright enough to catch the lights, and sunglasses so dark you could see a reflection of the courtroom in them. Behind her, a young assistant hurried with a leather folder, carrying documents as if the weight of her entire career depended on them. To Veronica, this wasn't a courtroom, it was an inconvenience she intended to wipe out in minutes. The murmurs started immediately. Some people recognized her name, others recognized her face from charity galas, magazine covers, and photos where she posed with governors and senators. But no one could miss the expression on her face, an expression that said she wasn't here to answer to anyone. Not a police officer. Not a clerk. And definitely not a municipal judge. When the clerk called her case, State of Rhode Island versus Veronica Lee Hale, she didn't step forward. She strolled, as if the court should be grateful she even showed up. She paused in front of Judge Caprio's bench, removed her sunglasses with 2 fingers, and looked around with a soft laugh. "Let's make this fast," she muttered, loud enough that people heard. The room fell quiet. Even Judge Caprio, a man who had heard every tone of disrespect imaginable, lifted his eyes a little slower than usual. "Good morning, Ms. Hale," he said politely. She didn't return the courtesy. "We'll see," she replied. "Depends how long this process takes." She waved her hand dismissively, as if the court was beneath her, and the assistant behind her stood frozen, unsure if she should speak or stay invisible. Judge Caprio tilted his head slightly. "This is your matter today. It will take as long as necessary." Veronica smirked. "I hope your definition of necessary is shorter than mine." A few small laughs slipped out from the gallery, not because she was funny, but because the arrogance was unbelievable. Judge Caprio ignored the reaction and opened the folder in front of him. "You're here for a set of violations," he began calmly. "Illegally parking in a marked fire lane outside a medical clinic. Ignoring multiple mailed notices. And making statements to an officer that could be considered intimidation. Do you understand these charges?" Veronica exhaled dramatically. "I understand that this is all a giant waste of resources. I stopped for 3 minutes. Nobody was using the lane. If anything, I was helping the clinic by not blocking their driveway. My SUV isn't exactly easy to maneuver." She shrugged, as if that was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Judge Caprio closed the file for a moment and looked directly at her. "A fire lane is not optional, Ms. Hale." She waved her hand again. "Everything's optional when you're smart about it." Then she leaned closer and added, "Besides, my company donates millions to this state. I'm sure we can all be a little flexible." It wasn't a threat. It was worse. She said it casually, as if money was a universal answer, and the courtroom should simply bend. A man in the gallery shook his head in disbelief. A woman whispered, "Oh, she picked the wrong judge." Even the clerk's eyes flickered nervously between Veronica and the bench. Judge Caprio responded with his characteristic calm. "This is not a bargaining table. It's a courtroom." Veronica raised a brow. "Believe me, Judge, I've negotiated deals far more complex than a parking ticket. I'm not here for a lecture in civics. I'm here to settle whatever small penalty you think is appropriate so I can get back to running a company that, arguably, keeps this city alive." Someone in the audience let out a quiet gasp. The assistant behind her closed her eyes, clearly praying the ground might swallow her whole. Judge Caprio picked up a document. You were blocking emergency access at a medical clinic. It was 5 minutes, Veronica snapped. 6, at most. And nothing happened. Except apparently a very dramatic officer who thinks writing tickets is a form of activism. Officer Diaz is simply enforcing the law, Caprio replied. The law applies to everyone. Veronica's laugh echoed through the room. Judge, with respect. She didn't finish the sentence, because Judge Caprio's tone shifted. Still calm, still gentle, but heavier. Ms. Hale, he said, if you intended to show respect, your behavior up to this moment does not reflect that. For the first time, Veronica's smirk faded for a second. Just a second. Then she straightened her blazer and said, fine. Let's play it your way. Read the ticket. Let's end it. I have a board meeting in an hour. The air in the courtroom tightened. People leaned forward. They could sense what was coming, the slow unraveling that happens only when someone believes their wealth can rewrite reality. Judge Caprio reopened her file, but this time there was something different in his expression. A caution. A question. And maybe even a little disappointment. Because Veronica thought she was here for a small ticket. But the judge knew something she didn't. The fire lane incident wasn't the whole story. Not even close. Judge Caprio turned another page in the file, and a faint line appeared between his brows. Ms. Hale, he said, this citation outside the medical clinic is not your first issue with fire lanes. The words slipped into the silence like a needle. Veronica shifted her weight. I'm sure whatever's there can be cleared up, she replied quickly. Administrative things pile up. That's why I pay people to handle them. The judge glanced at the assistant, who stared down at her own shoes, gripping the leather folder like a shield. 8 months ago, Caprio continued, you were issued a written warning for blocking an emergency access route at St. Mark's Children's Hospital. The officer notes that you remained parked for 15 minutes after being asked to move. Veronica rolled her eyes. That hospital has 3 entrances. I was there to visit a donor suite. Nothing happened. The judge didn't raise his voice. Something did happen, Ms. Hale. An ambulance had to reroute to a different entrance. The nurse's statement says they lost 3 minutes transferring a child from transport to the ER. A murmur rippled across the gallery. A grandmother in the back clutched her purse closer, brows knitting. Veronica's jaw tightened, but she still shrugged. And yet the child survived, didn't they? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Even her own assistant's head snapped up in disbelief. We're really going to pretend, Veronica continued, that every second is the difference between life and death. That's not how medicine works. People exaggerate under stress. I've seen it my whole life. For a long moment, Judge Caprio just looked at her. Not with anger, but with something almost heavier, disappointment. Do you recall what you told the officer who issued that warning? He asked. I don't recite conversations from months ago, she replied dismissively. Officer Russo, Caprio said, turning toward the side wall, do we have body camera audio from that incident? Yes, Your Honor, Russo replied. Just the verbal exchange. Play it, the judge said. A soft hiss of static filled the courtroom, then the sharp click of heels and the sound of an impatient sigh. Veronica's own voice poured out of the small speakers, colder, sharper than it sounded in person. Write whatever little warning you need, the recording said. But if this hospital wants another 7-figure donation from my family, they'll make sure their staff remembers who keeps the lights on. In the courtroom, Veronica blinked once, slowly, as if the words belonged to someone else. Then, on the recording, her voice cut in again, even more biting. Next time, tell your paramedics to drive faster. I'm not rearranging my schedule because someone's having an asthma attack. The audio clicked off. Silence slammed into the room. A woman in the gallery whispered, my grandson has asthma. Another man shook his head, eyes fixed on Veronica like he couldn't believe she was real. Judge Caprio clasped his hands together. "That was your voice?" he asked. Taken out of context, Veronica replied immediately, though the edge of confidence had thinned. "I was irritated. I chose the wrong words. People say things when they're stressed. I still wrote the hospital a check afterward." "So, you believe money justifies your words?" "I believe results justify methods," she snapped. "They got their funding. They upgraded their wing. Everyone won. This obsession with tone is a luxury for people who don't understand what it takes to make things happen." The judge studied her face carefully. "The obsession with tone you're referring to," he said slowly, "is how people experience respect, or disrespect. Especially when they are vulnerable." "You think I don't know vulnerability?" She laughed once, humorless. "I built my own division from scratch while reporters called me a spoiled oil princess. I'm judged every day, by men who inherited more power than I ever did. Don't lecture me on vulnerability, Judge." "Ms. Hale," he replied gently, "criticism of your privilege is not the same as an ambulance delayed in front of a children's hospital." Veronica's eyes flashed. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Tears? Guilt? A performance for your audience?" She gestured toward the benches without even looking at the people sitting there. "Fine. I was rude. I was impatient. I said things I shouldn't have said. There. Happy?" "This isn't about my happiness," Caprio answered. "It's about whether you understand the consequences of using your name and your money like weapons." "That's a dramatic word." "So was your threat to pull donations," he replied. "Ms. Reyes," he said, turning to his clerk, "has this court received any calls or communications regarding Ms. Hale's case?" The clerk checked the log. "Yes, Your Honor. 2 emails and 1 phone call from Hale Energy's legal office. All requesting expedited dismissal based on Ms. Hale's outstanding philanthropic record." The room reacted to that, quiet scoffs, a disbelieving chuckle. Veronica shrugged. "Of course they called. That's what legal departments do. They prevent small issues from becoming PR problems. That's not corruption. It's management." "Management," Caprio repeated softly, like he was testing the word. "You blocked fire lanes twice. You threatened to withdraw funding from a children's hospital. You dismissed a medical emergency as an inconvenience. You failed to respond to mailed notices. And your company called this court asking for special treatment." He set the file down. "Is that your definition of management?" "It's my definition of efficiency," she shot back. "Do you have any idea how many people depend on my decisions? How many jobs? How many families? I'm not going to derail my day over a parking technicality. That's what money is for, to fix small things so I can focus on bigger ones." Something in the back row snapped. A man in a worn work jacket leaned forward, his voice low but audible. "I move my truck every time I see those red lines," he said to the person beside him. "My wife almost died waiting for an ambulance once. There's no such thing as a small fire lane." Veronica heard it. Her jaw tightened again, but instead of softening, she wrapped herself tighter in defiance. "This is exactly what I mean," she said. "Emotion, not logic. You're turning a routine violation into a morality play because my last name makes good content." For the first time, Judge Caprio's eyes hardened. Not theatrically. Not performatively. Just enough that everyone in the room could feel the shift. "Ms. Hale," he said quietly, "in this courtroom, your last name changes nothing, except the size of the responsibility you carry when you forget that." She opened her mouth to answer, but he raised a hand. "We're not finished. There is body camera footage from the clinic as well. The officer reports you said something else that day. Something you may not realize is now part of this record." Veronica's fingers curled slightly around the edge of the defense table. "Play it," the judge said. And for the first time since she walked in, Veronica Lee Hale looked like someone who wasn't entirely sure she was still in control. The body camera footage began with a shaky frame of Officer Diaz standing beside Veronica's gleaming SUV, the clinic's brick wall rising behind him. The audio cut through the courtroom with uncomfortable clarity. You could hear the officer's calm voice asking her to move, followed by the sound of her door slamming open. Then Veronica's voice, cold, annoyed, dripping with entitlement, filled the room. "I'm not parking 3 streets away," she snapped in the recording. "I have a meeting. Move the cones. Figure it out. That's why you wear the uniform and I don't." A low ripple of shock swept the gallery. On the screen, the officer attempted to explain the fire lane designation, but Veronica cut him off again. "I give this city more money in a day than you'll earn in a year," she said sharply. "Don't pretend you're doing anything heroic by hassling me." The video froze there, on the frame where Veronica was pointing at Officer Diaz with her coffee cup like it was a gavel of her own. In the courtroom, the real Veronica straightened her spine. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't deny the footage. She didn't apologize. She simply stared at the screen as though everyone else was overreacting. Judge Caprio closed the laptop softly, the click louder in the silence than any shout could have been. He took a breath before speaking, as if choosing each word carefully. "Ms. Hale," he said quietly, "you dismissed this as a 5-minute inconvenience. But what I see, and what everyone here sees, is a pattern. A pattern of disrespect, entitlement, and disregard for public safety." Veronica crossed her arms. "I already told you, I regret my tone." "That wasn't tone," Caprio replied. "That was contempt." She scoffed. "Contempt is refusing to acknowledge someone's value." "I acknowledged him. I simply told him the truth, he was wasting time." "The truth," Caprio echoed. "Is that what you believe that clip showed?" "I believe," she said coolly, "that people like Officer Diaz misunderstand urgency. I run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I do not have the luxury of letting every minor rule slow me down." "You call them minor," Caprio said. "Others call them life-saving." Veronica shrugged again, but there was a flicker, just one, in her eyes. A crack beneath the armor. To make sure she heard the weight of the moment, the judge turned to the gallery. "Is anyone present from the clinic?" he asked. A hand rose near the back. A woman in her early 60s stood up, her uniform neat, her posture straight. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "I'm the head nurse on duty the day Ms. Hale blocked the entrance." Caprio nodded. "You may speak." The woman clasped her hands together. "That morning, we had an elderly patient struggling to breathe. We called her family. We called for an ambulance. But when we moved her outside on the stretcher, we couldn't get her close to the curb because the SUV was blocking the lane." The courtroom held its breath. She continued, "We lost time maneuvering around the vehicle. The patient survived, thank God. But those extra seconds, anyone in medicine will tell you, they matter. They matter more than money. More than inconvenience. They matter because people matter." Someone in the gallery murmured, "Exactly," under their breath. Veronica's expression remained tight, defensive. "I wasn't aware of any of that," she said. "No one told me there was a patient in distress." Nurse Thompson looked directly at her. "We tried to tell you," she said. "You rolled up your window." A hollow silence followed. One that even Veronica couldn't fill. Judge Caprio leaned slightly forward. "Ms. Hale," he said, "this is your moment to respond to what you've heard." Veronica inhaled deeply, but instead of softening, she hardened. "Look," she said, "I sympathize with emergencies. Truly. But I cannot be expected to read minds. If someone at that clinic had simply said, 'This is serious,' or if your officers didn't escalate every interaction, none of this would have happened. I didn't cause the emergency. I just parked a car. Let's not pretend I'm responsible for the entire medical system. There was a collective exhale of disbelief. Even the assistant behind her looked down, cheeks flushed. Judge Caprio's voice didn't rise. It dropped. And that drop made the room sharper, colder. Ms. Hale, he said, when someone approaches you in uniform and tells you a fire lane must remain clear, you do not need to read minds. You need to follow the law. If they say it's serious, you move. If they say nothing at all, you still move. Because fire lanes are not optional. Veronica bristled. Fine. And I said I understand that now. No, Caprio said firmly. You understand you have been caught. That is not the same thing. She opened her mouth, but no words came. So the judge continued. You spoke earlier about responsibility. The number of people who depend on your decisions. The size of your company. The impact you have on this state. He paused. Perhaps you are correct. Perhaps your influence is vast. But that influence carries weight. And when someone with power treats public safety as a personal inconvenience, it does more than delay an ambulance. It tells everyone watching that laws are flexible for the wealthy and rigid for everyone else. Veronica's shoulders stiffened. The judge didn't stop. That, he said, is the harm I am most concerned about. A quiet beat passed. Then Caprio lifted another document. One with a red tab. There is one more statement submitted to this court, he said. A statement from the daughter of the elderly woman who was on that stretcher. Veronica swallowed. The courtroom leaned forward as the judge began to read. My mother is alive today. But when I heard she couldn't get to the ambulance because someone had parked in the fire lane, I prayed that whoever did it understands that 5 minutes of their convenience nearly cost me 50 years of her love. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was devastating. And for the first time, Veronica Hale didn't look annoyed. She looked shaken. Just slightly. Just enough for the room to feel the shift. But not enough to prepare her for what was coming next. Judge Caprio set down the paper with the daughter's statement, and for a moment he simply looked at Veronica. Not with anger. Not with disdain. With something far more unnerving, expectation. Ms. Hale, he said quietly, you've just heard how your actions affected real human beings. Do you wish to respond? The billionaire oil tycoon straightened her blazer, lifted her chin, and collected her words with the precision of someone used to winning verbal sparring matches. I regret the inconvenience my parking caused, she began. Truly. But I cannot be the villain in every emergency that happens near my vehicle. I'm not responsible for every random situation that unfolds around me. And while I sympathize with the patient and her family, I refuse to accept the narrative that their crisis was somehow my doing. A low wave of murmurs ran through the room. Veronica didn't flinch. She continued, let's be realistic. Fire lanes get misused every day. Hundreds of people park illegally in this city. I'm simply being targeted because of who I am, because of my last name, because my wealth makes me an easy headline. And frankly, I'm tired of being portrayed as some heartless figure when all I did was step out of my car to buy coffee. Her tone sharpened. If this officer had communicated properly, this wouldn't even be a discussion. Officer Diaz, seated against the wall, inhaled, slow, steady, controlled. Judge Caprio turned toward him. Officer Diaz, would you like to respond to Ms. Hale's statement? Diaz stood respectfully. Your Honor, I told Ms. Hale 3 times that she was parked in a fire lane. She dismissed me every time. She rolled up her window when I explained the emergency protocol. I tried to warn her, but she treated me like noise. Veronica immediately interjected, that is simply not true. I never rolled up my window at him. I just. Caprio held up a hand. Ms. Hale, you will get your turn. She pressed her lips tight. Officer Diaz continued. Your Honor, I've stopped cars belonging to teachers, to construction workers, to students, to retirees. 99% comply the moment they hear, fire lane. Ms. Hale didn't. She acted like the rule didn't apply because she was in a hurry. Veronica exhaled sharply, I was not being reckless. I was being realistic. The judge leaned forward. Realistic about what? She hesitated. About the fact that I operate at a level where time is my most valuable resource. If I stopped to think about every single restriction in this city, I'd get nothing done. The judge's expression hardened, not with anger, but with disappointment. So laws, he said softly, are obstacles to your schedule. She blinked slowly. Sometimes, yes. That's just the truth. The room went completely still. Caprio rested both hands on the bench, his voice lower and heavier than before. Ms. Hale, do you understand what the word law means? A law is not a suggestion. A law is not a courtesy. A law is not something you obey only when it is convenient. Her jaw clenched. He continued, you speak of your time as if it outweighs the time of every man, woman, and child around you. You call this being realistic, but what it truly is arrogance. Veronica's eyes flashed with offense. I object to that characterization. Object all you want, Caprio replied. It doesn't make it untrue. Her gaze tightened. And then the judge did something unexpected. He pulled out a second document, this one thicker, stapled, with multiple tabs on the side. Ms. Hale, he said, are you familiar with the incident report filed by Providence Fire Department Medic Unit 14? She stiffened. No. I haven't seen anything like that. That's interesting, Caprio said, because it concerns you. He opened the file. According to this report, the ambulance attempting to reach the clinic had to park 47 feet farther down the street because your vehicle blocked the lane. Veronica's voice sharpened defensively. 47 feet is hardly catastrophic. The judge's gaze lifted, sharp as glass. To you. Not to the paramedics. Not to the patient. And not to the daughter who wrote that statement. He read directly from the form. Delay in stretcher transfer approximately 11 to 14 seconds due to obstruction in fire lane. He closed the file slowly. Do you know what can happen in 14 seconds during a breathing crisis, Ms. Hale? Do you? Veronica didn't answer. So he did. In 14 seconds, a patient's oxygen saturation can drop dramatically. In 14 seconds, the difference between full recovery and permanent damage can begin. In 14 seconds, a life can slip. A ripple of emotion moved through the room. And then came the hammer, quiet but devastating. Ms. Hale, the judge said softly, your wealth protects you from many things. But not from responsibility. For the first time since she entered the courtroom, Veronica's confident mask wavered. Her throat bobbed. Her eyes blinked a little too fast. But the judge wasn't done. He picked up one more paper, a complaint form written by a retired firefighter who witnessed the situation. He read aloud. I served 31 years as a Providence firefighter. I've seen people die because paths were blocked. Seeing that SUV there brought back memories I'll never forget. No one is above fire safety. Caprio looked up at her, and something about his stillness made the entire room lean in. You came in here with power, he said quietly. But now the only question left is whether you have humility. She looked shaken, but she forced her voice steady. Your Honor, I've apologized. What more do you want from me? Caprio's reply was simple. The truth. Not the one you rehearsed. The one you've avoided. A long silence followed. Her jaw trembled, not with fear, but with the realization she could no longer control the narrative. And then the judge delivered the sentence that would redefine everything. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Caprio folded his hands and looked at Veronica Hale, no longer with frustration, but with a piercing calm that cut deeper than anger ever could. "Ms. Hale," he began, "before I deliver my decision, I'm going to give you one final chance. A chance most people never get." She straightened, her voice guarded. "A chance for what?" "To tell this courtroom why you believe the rules should bend for you." Her shoulders lifted slightly. "I don't believe that." The judge raised one eyebrow. "Everything you've said today suggests otherwise." Veronica swallowed, her voice turning brittle. "I'm not a bad person. I built my company from scratch. I've created thousands of jobs. I donate millions to charity. I work harder than anyone in this room. And I refuse, absolutely refuse, to be defined by one parking mistake blown out of proportion because a few people want to villainize the wealthy." Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "You do work hard. You have achieved things most people only dream of. But none of that gives you the right to put someone else's life in danger." She flinched, not from guilt, but from the fact someone dared speak to her without flattery. "The world calls me heartless," she said defensively. "They don't know what I carry." Caprio's voice softened. "Then tell us." Her jaw locked, stubborn, proud, immovable. But then something in her finally cracked. "My father died waiting for an ambulance," she whispered. "I was 15. He'd collapsed in our backyard. The ambulance couldn't get through because cars were blocking the street." Her voice trembled. "I watched him lying there, gasping for breath, and all I could think was, why aren't they here yet?" The room froze. Even Officer Diaz lowered his gaze. Veronica blinked hard, her voice breaking. "So yes, when I drove up to that clinic, I told myself no one would get hurt in 2 minutes. I told myself I knew the risk. I told myself I understood emergencies because I grew up in one. But the truth is, Your Honor," she wiped her cheek quickly, "I avoid fire lanes because they remind me of that day. And on Monday, I was too distracted, too stressed, too pressed for time, and I ignored everything I should have remembered." Silence swelled through the courtroom, thick, heavy, undeniable. Caprio let the moment breathe. "Ms. Hale," he said quietly, "you lost your father in a moment where seconds mattered. And yet you created the same risk for someone else's father. That's not hypocrisy. That's humanity. We forget the very lessons carved into us by pain. But today, we remember." Her chin quivered. For the first time since the hearing began, she nodded, not in arrogance, not in dismissal, but in something painfully close to surrender. Judge Caprio looked down at his notes. When he spoke again, his voice held both firmness and mercy. "Here is my ruling." The courtroom straightened collectively. For parking in a fire lane and obstructing emergency access, the statutory fine is $500. Veronica didn't react, money was the least of her concerns. "But that," he continued, "is not the heart of this case." He lifted the daughter's statement. "You caused a delay that terrified a family." He lifted the firefighter's letter. "You triggered memories for a man who spent his life saving others." He lifted the officer's report. "You dismissed warnings from a public servant doing his job." He set them down carefully. "And above all, you forgot what it means to be responsible for more than yourself." Veronica's eyes were glossy and unsteady. "Therefore," Caprio said, voice deepening, "your sentence will reflect not punishment, but understanding." A hush fell over the room. "You will pay the $500 fine." She nodded slowly. "You will also complete 50 hours of community service with the Providence Fire Department's public education team." Her breath caught. "You will attend emergency access workshops, speak with paramedics, and learn exactly what those 14 seconds meant." Somewhere behind her, the daughter who wrote the statement wiped her eyes quietly. "And finally," the judge said, "you will record a public service message that will play before municipal traffic hearings, reminding citizens of one simple truth: fire lanes are for emergencies, not conveniences." A soft gasp filled the courtroom. Veronica's voice trembled. You want me to speak publicly about this? Yes, the judge said. Because your voice carries power. And it's time you used that power for more than oil. For more than business. For more than status. He leaned forward. It's time you used it to save someone's father instead of losing your own. A tear fell down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. Instead, she breathed in, slow, steady, and nodded. I'll do it, she whispered. The judge closed his folder. Good. Then this case is closed. He struck the gavel. A single, soft echo filled the room. Not final. Not punitive. Transformative. Veronica stood frozen. Her posture, once hard and unyielding, now softened into humility she never thought she possessed. Officer Diaz approached quietly. She looked at him, voice fragile. I'm sorry. He nodded once. Make the message count. She nodded back. As she walked out of the courtroom, Veronica Hale did not look like a billionaire. She looked like something far rarer. A powerful person who finally learned what true responsibility feels like.